771,000 Americans were homeless on a single night last year. That is the highest number ever recorded, and 40 to 60% of them have a job. They work, they clock in, they have a boss, and a schedule, and a paycheck, and they sleep in their car. There is not a single county in the United States of America where a full-time worker earning minimum wage can afford a two-bedroom apartment. Not one. The federal minimum wage has not been raised since 2009. That is 17 years. In that same 17 years, median rents went up 23% and renter incomes went up 5%. The richest country on earth now has 7.2 million fewer affordable housing units than it needs, and people who experience homelessness in this country die 30 years earlier than the average American. 30 years. The typical working American has less than $1,000 saved for retirement. The average 401k for someone about to retire gives them $8,300 a year. Social Security is insolvent in less than 7 years. 90% of Americans say we are in a mental health crisis. 76% of workers report burnout. The Surgeon General said loneliness is killing people at the same rate as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 1 in 4 adults could not afford to eat properly last year. 34% of Americans skipped a meal because they could not afford food. 39% of the workforce needs a side hustle just to survive. The U.S. now ranks 49th in the world for life expectancy, and it is projected to drop to 66th by 2050. And 264,000 Americans die every year from what researchers call deaths of despair, drugs, alcohol, suicide, in the richest nation in human history. You already know something is wrong. You have known for a while. You feel it every time you check your bank account, every time you open a bill, every time you drive over a pothole on a road that has not been fixed in years, every time you hear a politician say the economy is strong while you are doing math in a grocery store aisle trying to figure out what you can afford to put back. That feeling is not in your head. That feeling is real, and today I am going to prove it. And you are going to understand exactly why everything feels the way it feels, and you are going to realize that you were right all along. I need to start with something that most Americans do not know, and once you hear it, it is going to reframe everything else I say in this video. The United States of America, the wealthiest nation in the history of human civilization, is now ranked 49th in the world for life expectancy. Not first, not 10th, not even 20th, 49th. And according to a massive study published in The Lancet by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, that ranking is forecasted to drop to 66th by 2050. We are not catching up, we are falling further behind every single year. And the numbers behind this are staggering. Between 2010 and 2019, life expectancy in the United States grew by just 0.1 years. In comparable wealthy countries, it grew by 1.2 years over the same period. We gained 5 weeks. They gained over a year. And then COVID hit and erased 26 years of progress in this country. Life expectancy dropped 2.7 years between 2019 and 2021, the steepest decline since World War II. Scientific American called it exactly what it was. The U.S. just lost 26 years' worth of progress on life expectancy. And while other wealthy nations rebounded quickly, we recovered more slowly and remained behind where we were before the pandemic started. The American Journal of Public Health published a study showing that since 1933, 56 countries across 6 continents have surpassed U.S. life expectancy. We went from 12th in the world in 1950 to 46th by 2021. Our infant mortality rate is the worst among peer nations. Our maternal mortality rate is triple the OECD average. And here is the detail that should haunt you. Over 264,000 Americans die every year from what researchers now call deaths of despair, which is the clinical term for drug overdoses, alcohol-related diseases, and suicides. The CDC reported over 105,000 overdose deaths in 2022, more than 5 times the number from 2002. Suicide rates increased 35% from 1999 to 2019, and youth suicide specifically increased 57% between 2007 and 2018. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death for Americans aged 10 to 24. And the U.S. Congress Joint Economic Committee documented that deaths of despair are now at the highest levels since World War I for alcohol-related mortality and since 1938 for suicide. We spend more per person on healthcare than any country on the planet, and our people are dying younger, sicker, and more desperate than people in countries that spend a fraction of what we spend. The Peterson KF Health System Tracker confirmed that the U.S. ranks lowest in life expectancy for both men and women among all countries with comparable GDP. The IHME study found that healthy life expectancy in the U.S., which measures how many years you can expect to live in good health rather than just alive, is forecasted to drop from 80th in the world to 108th by 2050. And women's health is declining faster than men's, with female healthy life expectancy forecasted to decline in 20 states by 2050. A researcher at the University of Maryland looked at the data and said something that I cannot get out of my head. He said this is not supposed to happen. We cannot put public health on autopilot. There is no invisible hand of development raising living standards over time, and he is right. This is the richest country on earth, and it is producing some of the sickest, shortest, most desperate lives in the developed world. And the reason nobody talks about it is because the answer to why is not one thing. It is everything. It is the healthcare system, the food system, the inequality, the poverty, the addiction, the isolation, the despair. It is the slow-motion collapse of every system that is supposed to keep people alive, and it shows up not as a single headline, but as a million quiet funerals that never make the news. All right, I want you to think about the last time you went to the grocery store and put something back on the shelf because it cost too much. Maybe it was a cut of meat. Maybe it was the brand of cereal your kids actually like versus the store brand you know they will not eat. Maybe it was fresh fruit that you swapped for canned because the price difference was $3 and $3 matters right now. Now imagine doing that with everything in the store. Imagine standing in an aisle doing math in your head on every single item and then walking out with less than what your family actually needs for the week, because that is the reality for nearly 1 in 4 American adults right now. The Urban Institute published a report in March 2026 finding that 24.2% of adults aged 18 and older reported experiencing household food insecurity in the last 12 months. That is not a small fringe group. That is roughly 1 in 4 working-age adults in the wealthiest nation on earth who cannot reliably feed themselves or their families. And among families with children, it is even worse. Nearly 1 in 3 working-age adults living with children, 32%, reported food insecurity in 2025. And approximately half of those families experienced what the USDA classifies as very low food security, which is the severe form where people are actually skipping meals or going entire days without eating because they do not have money to buy food. The Century Foundation conducted a survey of over 1,400 registered voters and found that 34% of respondents said they had skipped a meal in the past year because they could not afford to eat. Among Black Americans, that number was 44%. Among adults under 30, it was 54%. More than half of young adults in this country skipped a meal in the last year because of cost, and it is not just the poorest households that are affected. The Urban Institute found that food insecurity increased among families with moderate incomes, those earning between 200 and 400% of the federal poverty level. More than one-third of those families, 34.2%, reported food insecurity in 2025, up from 30.6% in 2024. That is families making $60,000 to $120,000 a year, who cannot reliably feed their households. The USDA's own data from 2023 showed that 47.4 million Americans lived in food-insecure households. 14 million of those were children. In 381,000 households with kids, the children themselves were skipping meals or going whole days without eating. And 97% of households with very low food security reported they did not have money to buy food after their groceries ran out. 97%. And here is the part that should make you furious. In July 2025, Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which included the deepest cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program in SNAP's entire history. SNAP is the program formerly known as food stamps. It is the single largest federal anti-hunger program in the country, and over 50 million Americans turned to food banks and food pantries for help last year, according to Feeding America. The cuts to SNAP fall predominantly on families with incomes below 200% of the federal poverty level, and more than half of working-age adults at that income level already reported food insecurity in 2025. And at the same time Congress was cutting SNAP, the USDA announced it would terminate the Economic Research Service's Household Food Security Reports, which are the primary government tool for even measuring how many Americans are going hungry. They cut the program that feeds people, and then they eliminated the system that tracks how many people are going hungry. That is not incompetence. That is a deliberate choice to stop counting a problem so you do not have to answer for it. A childcare teacher in Colorado told Stanford's Rapid Survey Project that she is skipping meals so the kids she takes care of can eat. A center director in Indiana said she cannot afford enough food to last the entire month. These are the people who take care of other people's children for a living, and they are going hungry. In the richest country in the history of the world, And when the cost of groceries has gone up 26% since 2019, according to BLS data, and wages for lower-income households have gone up just 1% year over year, according to Bank of America, and the program that was supposed to bridge the gap is being gutted, what you are looking at is not a policy disagreement. It is a country that has decided through its actions, if not its words, that it is acceptable for tens of millions of its own citizens to go hungry. And that is a sign of collapse that no GDP number or stock market chart can paper over. One full-time job no longer pays the bills in America, and that is the clearest sign that the entire economic model has failed. Your grandparents worked one job. One. Your grandfather went to a factory or an office or a shop 5 days a week and came home, and that single paycheck covered the mortgage, the car, the groceries, the utilities, the family vacation once a year, and probably a little bit extra that went into savings. That was not unusual. That was normal. That was what a job was supposed to do. It was supposed to be enough. Now let me tell you what a job does in 2026. The Washington Post reported, based on January BLS data, that the share of employed Americans working multiple jobs is at a 25-year high. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says 8.4 million adults now officially hold more than one job, but IRS data puts the real number closer to 39% of the workforce when you include side hustles and gig income. A monster survey found that 47% of U.S. workers are already polyworking, which is the new term for holding multiple jobs simultaneously, and nearly 60% are open to holding multiple full-time jobs at the same time just to stay afloat. According to Side Hustle Nation, 39% of the U.S. working population maintains a side hustle in 2026, including nearly 50% of millennials. A Lending Tree survey found that most side hustlers say they could not afford to live without their supplemental income, and 42% of people making less than $50,000 a year said they use their side gig money for basic living expenses, not vacations, not luxuries, rent, groceries, gas, the things that one job used to cover. Side hustlers bring in an average of $1,200 extra a month, according to Investigate TV, but nearly half spend at least 10 hours a week on their side gig, which is essentially an extra workday on top of their regular job. A financial expert named Stoy Hall, who runs a wealth management firm in Iowa, said something that stuck with me. He said the most significant and overlooked risk of juggling multiple jobs is burnout. He asked a simple question that I think cuts to the heart of this. Is it a side gig, because you just need extra money, and it is something simple? Well, that is fine, he said, but it is dragging you away from other things in life, other memories, your relationships, even more time in your actual 9 to 5 that maybe could give you more money. And a UNC Chapel Hill sociologist named Alexandria Revenell, who studies the gig economy, said something that is even more damning. She said, we have seen stagnant salaries, we have seen inflation, we have seen the cost of living overall increasing even beyond our inflation measures, so people are looking for ways to supplement and to build themselves a little bit of a safety net. And then she said the thing that nobody in corporate America wants to hear. She said the house always wins when it comes to the gig platforms. Real wages for lower-income households grew by less than 1% this year, while living costs rose 3%, according to the Sacramento Observer. That gap has pushed millions into second, third, and even fourth income streams. A teacher in Baltimore making $60,000 a year started moonlighting as a house manager at a theater just to make ends meet. A workforce specialist in Syracuse was delivering groceries for Instacart and Walmart on top of his full-time job because he said even that extra couple $100s a month went a long way. And one gig worker summed up the whole thing in 5 words that should be a national scandal. He said, "I do not do anything. I do not have a life. That is what we have built. A country where working one full-time job is not enough to survive, where nearly 40% of the workforce needs supplemental income just to cover basic expenses, and where the cost of earning enough to live is that you no longer have time to actually live. Your grandparents worked one job and had a life. You work 2 or 3 jobs and have a schedule. That is not progress. That is collapse, wearing a lanyard. America has decided that its children are not worth protecting, and the data proves it. I am going to say something in this section that is going to make some people uncomfortable, and I do not care because it needs to be said. The way this country treats its children is the single most damning evidence that the system is collapsing, because a society that cannot or will not protect its youngest and most vulnerable members is a society that has given up on the future. Nearly 10 million children in America live in families below the federal poverty line right now. That is roughly 1 in 7 kids. 2.5 million of those children are in what is classified as deep poverty, which means their families are trying to raise them on incomes that would not cover basic rent and food in most communities anywhere in the country. And we know how to fix this because we already did it. In 2021, the expanded child tax credit reduced child poverty to the lowest level ever recorded, 5.2% according to the Census Bureau. It was the single most effective anti-poverty policy in modern American history. Families used the money for rent, groceries, childcare, and school supplies. The data was clear, immediate, and undeniable. And then Congress let it expire. Child poverty did not drift back up. It spiked. Millions of children were added to the poverty rolls in a single year. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities called the record rise in poverty the direct result of policy choices. Not an accident, not an economic downturn. A choice. And the replacement that Congress passed in 2025 under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is designed in a way that the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy says will give virtually zero benefit to children in the poorest 20% of American families. 99% of children in the poorest fifth of households will receive a reduced credit or no credit at all. Meanwhile, 41% of the benefits from the new CTC provision will go to the richest fifth of Americans. They redesigned the child tax credit to give more money to rich families and less to poor ones. And that is happening at the same time that the cost of raising a child has become financially catastrophic for working families. Average daycare in this country costs $1,300 a month for one child. That is $15,600 a year. In many cities, it is far higher. People are paying $4,000 a month for 2 kids in daycare. At that price, as one creator said, if one parent is only bringing home $3,000 a month, why are you even going to work? You are working for negative income. You would literally save money by quitting your job, and 14 million children lived in food-insecure households in the latest USDA data. In 381,000 households with children, the kids themselves were skipping meals or going entire days without eating. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death for Americans aged 10 to 24. Youth suicide rates increased 57% between 2007 and 2018. And 42% of high school students reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in the CDC's most recent youth mental health survey, up from 28% in 2011. Nearly 1 in 4 young girls have been found to self-harm. The Pew Charitable Trusts called it a mental health crisis affecting children on a national scale. And the SNAP cuts passed in 2025, the deepest in the program's history, fall predominantly on families with children earning below 200% of the federal poverty level. More than half of working-age adults at that income level already reported food insecurity. A child's odds of having enough food, a safe school, a doctor, and a bed depend less on their needs than on their zip code. Kids at Risk Action published a report this week saying that roughly 10 million children are in poverty and 4 million are uninsured, and asked a question that I think every American should have to answer. How does this country actually value its children? Because the data says it does not. A country that had the solution to child poverty in its hands, watched it work, and then deliberately chose to take it away, is not a country that is committed to its future. It is a country that is consuming its future. And every one of those 10 million kids knows it. They can feel it, even if they cannot name it yet. The taxes you pay have become a wealth transfer system that takes from the people who work and gives to the people who do not need it. Let me walk you through something that most people never think about because it is so woven into the fabric of your daily life that you do not even notice it anymore. Think about your paycheck for a second. Before you even see a dollar, the federal government takes its cut: income tax, then Social Security tax, then Medicare tax. What is left is your take-home pay. Now you take that money, the money that has already been taxed, and you go buy groceries. Sales tax. You put gas in your car. Federal excise tax plus state gas tax. You pay your property tax on the house you bought with money that was already taxed. You pay your car registration. You pay your cell phone bill, which has federal, state, and local taxes and fees baked into it. You pay your electricity bill, which includes various surcharges and taxes. If you manage to save any money after all of that and you invest it, you pay capital gains tax when you sell. If you give more than a certain amount to your own family members, there is a gift tax. And when you die, whatever is left can be subject to estate tax. You are taxed when you earn it, taxed when you spend it, taxed when you save it, taxed when you invest it, taxed when you give it away, and taxed when you die. And as one of the creators in the reference footage pointed out, if you do the math, roughly 25% of your annual income goes to federal taxes alone. That means for the first 3 months of every year, January through March, You are working entirely for the government. You do not start earning money for yourself until approximately April. And what do you get for all of that? Crumbling bridges that are rated structurally deficient, a healthcare system that bankrupts you even with insurance, schools that are underfunded, Social Security that will be insolvent in less than 7 years, roads full of potholes, a military budget of $886 billion in fiscal year 2024 that just got a proposed 50% increase to $1.5 trillion, while your kids' schools are losing teachers, and a government that crossed $39 trillion in debt last week, meaning that a growing portion of the taxes you pay is not even going to services. It is going to interest payments on money the government already borrowed and spent. The Peter G. Peterson Foundation reported that interest costs are rapidly crowding out key investments in the future. Every dollar that goes to servicing the debt is a dollar that cannot go to infrastructure, education, healthcare, or anything else that actually improves your life. And here is the part that connects this to the collapse argument. The Institute for Policy Studies found that as the richest 0.01% of Americans accumulated more wealth over the past several decades, they have paid a smaller share of total U.S. taxes. Their share of the nation's wealth nearly quadrupled from 2.5% to 9.6%, but their tax share in 2018 was close to what it was in 1953. They got 4 times richer and paid the same percentage. Americans for Tax Fairness found that 100 billionaire families spent $2.6 billion on elections in 2024, representing 16.5% of all political contributions. In 2000, billionaire election spending was $18 million, just 0.6%. They went from 0.6% of political spending to 16.5% in 24 years. They used the money they saved on taxes to buy the political system that writes the tax code. And under the OBBA passed in 2025, ITEP found that the largest share of child tax credit benefits, 41%, goes to the richest fifth of Americans, while virtually nothing goes to the poorest fifth. The new tax law literally redistributes money upward, from the families who need it most to the families who need it least. So the system works like this. You work. You are taxed at every stage of earning and spending. That tax money goes to a government that is $39 trillion in debt, and spending a growing share of your contributions on interest payments. The richest people in the country pay a shrinking share of their wealth in taxes. They use the savings to buy political influence. That influence produces tax laws that benefit them even further. And the infrastructure, the schools, the safety net programs, and the services that your taxes were supposed to fund are deteriorating because the money is going to debt service and upward redistribution instead. That is not a tax system. That is a wealth extraction pipeline disguised as civic duty. And the fact that most Americans accept it as normal is the clearest possible evidence that the collapse is already so advanced that we cannot even see it anymore. We just call it April. Retirement in America is disappearing, and nobody under 50 is prepared for what that actually means. Let me tell you something that your parents' generation never had to think about and that your generation cannot stop thinking about. Retirement. The idea that you work for 30 or 40 years and then you get to stop and actually enjoy the last chapter of your life. That idea is dying in America right now, and the data behind it is so bad that when you see it laid out in front of you, it is genuinely hard to believe. The National Institute on Retirement Security published a report in February 2026, finding that the typical working American has less than $1,000 saved for retirement. Not $100,000, not $10,000, less than $1,000. And NARS Executive Director Dan Doonan said publicly that at a time when Americans are facing a growing affordability crisis, retirement should be part of that conversation, because it is not. Nobody is talking about it. Now here is the structural reason this is happening. Retirement in America used to be built on what AARP calls a three-legged stool. Leg 1 was your pension from your employer. Leg 2 was Social Security. Leg 3 was your personal savings. That stool held for decades, but one of those legs, the pension, got sawed off. In the mid-1980s, about half of private sector workers were covered by pension plans. By 2022, CNN reported that only 15% had them. The pension is gone for most working Americans, and it is not coming back. So the entire burden shifted to the 401k, which was never designed to be the primary retirement vehicle for an entire nation. It was originally a supplement, and the numbers show how badly it has failed as a replacement. Vanguard data shows the average 401k balance for workers aged 55 to 64, the people who are about to retire, is $208,000. If you follow the standard 4% withdrawal rule, that gives you $8,300 a year in retirement income. $8,300. That does not cover your property taxes and your electricity bill, let alone everything else. And the third leg, Social Security, is cracking. The CBO projects insolvency by fiscal year 2032. When it hits, benefits get cut by 24 to 28% automatically by law. A typical retiring couple would lose $18,400 a year, and Social Security payments already provide about 90% of income for more than a quarter of older adults, according to the Social Security Administration. For a lot of seniors, it is not a supplement, it is everything, and it is about to shrink. Axios reported that a record 4.2 million Americans turned 65 in 2025 alone, stepping into retirement just as the system underneath them is crumbling. An economist at the New School for Social Research named Teresa Ghilarducci, who is one of the leading retirement researchers in the country, said her data shows that only 10% of Americans between ages 62 and 70 who are retired are financially stable. 10%. And the National Council on Aging found that nearly 50% of adults age 60 and older have household incomes below the Elder Index, which is the minimum amount needed to afford basic needs. And their research found something that should make you sick. Low-income older adults die 9 years earlier than those with the greatest wealth. Poverty does not just ruin your retirement. It literally shortens your life by almost a decade. A 60-year-old administrative assistant in Pittsburgh told CNN she has $360,000 saved in her 401k, which she knows is better than average, and even she said she has no illusion of it being enough. She said, "I will work until the wheels fall off." That is a woman with more retirement savings than most Americans will ever have, and she still cannot afford to stop working. Fortune just published a piece 2 days ago that gave the U.S. retirement system a C+ grade and said that without reform, more Americans risk reaching retirement without enough income or the tools to access what they have saved. And 79% of Americans surveyed by NIRS said the country faces a retirement crisis, up from 67% just a few years ago. So think about that for a second. One leg of the stool is gone. The second leg is about to be cut by a quarter. And the third leg, your 401k, has a median balance that would give you $8,300 a year. That is the retirement system in the richest country on earth in 2026. And if you are under 50 right now, I need you to hear this clearly. Nobody is coming to fix this for you. The politicians will not fix it, because fixing it requires either raising taxes or cutting benefits, and both of those lose elections. The companies will not fix it, because pensions cost money and 401ks shift the risk to you. And the system will not fix itself because the math gets worse every single year. So either you build something on your own, or you join the 87-year-old man splitting a studio apartment and working at Costco 3 days a week. Those are the two options. And the fact that those are the only two options is the collapse. Americans are the loneliest people in the developed world, and it is killing them as effectively as cigarettes. This one does not have a dollar sign attached to it, and that is exactly why nobody pays attention to it. But I am going to make the case right now that what I am about to describe is one of the deadliest forces in America today, and it is more dangerous than most of the economic numbers on this list, because it operates invisibly, it gets worse every year, and it makes every other problem harder to solve. In 2023, the United States Surgeon General declared loneliness a national epidemic. That is not a metaphor. That is a formal public health advisory, the same classification used for tobacco and obesity. Dr. Vivek Murthy said in his letter, introducing the advisory, that the mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. I need you to hear that again. Being lonely in America carries the same health risk as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And the data behind that statement is terrifying. Social isolation is associated with a 50% increased risk of developing dementia, a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% increased risk of stroke. The World Health Organization estimates that loneliness contributes to roughly 871,000 deaths every year globally. And in the United States specifically, about half of all adults reported experiencing measurable levels of loneliness even before the pandemic started. A major Cigna survey found that nearly 3 in 5 Americans say that no one truly knows them. Let that sit for a second. 60% of the people around you feel fundamentally unseen, and it is getting worse for young people at an alarming rate. The Surgeon General's report found that across age groups, people are spending less time with each other in person than they were 2 decades ago. But the most dramatic decline was among young people aged 15 to 24, who experienced a 70% reduction in social interaction with their friends. 70% in a single generation. Young Americans lost 7 out of every 10 hours they used to spend with friends. And the APA found in a November 2025 poll that more than 6 in 10 adults say societal division itself is a significant source of stress. People are not just lonely. They are lonely in a country that feels like it is splitting apart at the seams. And here is where this connects to the collapse argument in a way that most finance channels will never talk about. Every single problem I have discussed in this video, the crumbling infrastructure, the government insolvency, the retirement crisis, the healthcare bankruptcies, the housing impossibility, every one of those problems requires collective action to solve. It requires people trusting each other, working together, sacrificing together, building together. But you cannot build anything together when half the country feels fundamentally disconnected from the other half. You cannot organize a community when people do not know their neighbors. You cannot demand better from your government when people have retreated into isolation and given up on the idea that anything can change. Loneliness is not just a personal tragedy, it is a civic disease. It dissolves the social fabric that makes collective problem-solving possible. And without that fabric, every system that depends on cooperation, which is every system that matters, starts to fail. The Surgeon General compared this to hunger or thirst. He said loneliness is a feeling we experience when something we need for survival is missing from our life. And just like hunger, when it persists, it becomes dangerous. A researcher at Harvard's Making Caring Common project found that 65% of lonely people feel fundamentally separate or disconnected from others or the world, and 57% said they were unable to share their deepest feelings with anyone. And a 2026 report from Reach Out Recovery noted a growing phenomenon called financial loneliness, which is the isolation that comes from feeling excluded from social life because you cannot afford to participate. You cannot go to the restaurant, you cannot take the trip, you cannot join the group because everything costs money and you do not have it, so you stay home alone. And the loneliness compounds the financial stress, which compounds the health effects, which compounds the loneliness. It is a death spiral that operates below the surface of every economic chart in this video. And the country that used to solve its biggest problems by pulling together is now a country of 330 million people who increasingly cannot even stand to be in the same room with each other. That is not a society that is going to navigate what is coming. That is a society that is already collapsing, one empty living room at a time. The American economy has become a machine that rewards you for owning things and punishes you for working for a living. I want to explain something to you right now that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it will change the way you understand every economic conversation in this country going forward. There are two economies in America, not officially, not legally, but functionally. In terms of how they operate and who they reward, there are two completely separate systems running at the same time. Economy number one is the ownership economy. This is the economy that rewards you for having assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, intellectual property. If you own these things, the economy works for you in ways that are almost magical. Your house goes up in value while you sleep. Your stock portfolio grows at 8 to 10% a year on average. Your rental properties generate passive income from people who cannot afford to buy. You pay capital gains tax on your investment income at 15 or 20%, which is lower than what most working people pay on their wages. And if you hold your assets until you die, your heirs can inherit them with a stepped-up basis, which means the capital gains tax on decades of appreciation is wiped out entirely. Economy number two is the labor economy. This is the economy you live in. If your primary source of income is a paycheck, you trade your time for money, you get taxed at ordinary income rates, which for many workers is 22 to 24% federal before state taxes even begin. You pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on every dollar of earned income up to the cap. You pay for health care out of your paycheck. Your income only goes up when your employer decides to give you a raise, and Bankrate reported that wages still have not caught up with inflation since the pandemic-era surge in prices. You have no equity, no appreciation, no passive income. You work, you get paid, you spend it, and you start over on Monday. Now, here is the thing that should make you angry. The entire structure of the American tax code, the financial system, and the policy framework is designed to accelerate the first economy and drain the second one. The wealthiest Americans, whose income comes primarily from capital gains, dividends, and business ownership, pay a lower effective tax rate than many middle-class workers whose income comes from a paycheck. Warren Buffett famously said he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary, and that structural advantage has only gotten wider since then. The Institute for Policy Studies found that the richest 0.01% nearly quadrupled their wealth share, while their tax share stayed essentially flat. That is the ownership economy in action. And here is how it affects you personally. If you are a working person, you are caught in a trap. You need to earn money to survive, but the act of earning money through labor is taxed more heavily than the act of earning money through ownership. You need housing, but you cannot afford to buy, so you rent, which means your monthly housing payment builds equity for your landlord, not for you. Every rent check you write makes your landlord richer and you poorer. You need a car to get to work, but cars depreciate the moment you drive them off the lot, so your transportation cost is pure expense with no return. Meanwhile, the person who owns the car dealership is building wealth from the same transaction. You need healthcare, but the cost of premiums and deductibles takes money out of your pocket that could otherwise go to savings or investment, which means the healthcare system is actively preventing you from crossing from the labor economy into the ownership economy. And this is where it gets structural. The reason housing is unaffordable is not just because there are not enough houses, it is because housing has been financialized. Institutional investors, REITs, and wealthy individuals buy properties as assets, which drives up prices, which locks out working people, which forces them to rent, which generates income for the owners, which they use to buy more properties. It is a loop. And the reason the stock market keeps hitting record highs while half the country cannot cover a $1,000 emergency is because the stock market is the ownership economy's scoreboard, and most working Americans are not in the game. The Federal Reserve's data shows that the top 10% of households own roughly 87% of all stocks. The bottom 50% own almost none. So when the Dow goes up 500 points, it is not your economy improving, it is theirs. And the politicians who tell you the economy is doing great because the stock market is up are telling you that the ownership economy is doing great. Your economy, the one where you trade time for money and pray that your car does not break down, that economy has been deteriorating for 40 years. The gap between these two economies is the collapse. It is the reason a billionaire can gain $100 million in a single day, while a teacher in Baltimore has to work a second job at a theater to pay her student loans. It is the reason the top 1% holds 31% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% holds 2.6%. It is the reason 90% of children born in 1940 earned more than their parents, and only 50% of children born in the 1980s can say the same. The ladder is not broken. The ladder was pulled up, and the people at the top are charging you rent to stand on the ground floor. America is not going through a rough patch. America is experiencing a psychological collapse, and 90% of the country knows it. I want to talk about the thing that everyone in this country is feeling, but almost nobody is willing to name, because naming it makes it real, and making it real means you have to do something about it. America is not just financially stressed. America is mentally, emotionally, and spiritually breaking down. And the data on this is so overwhelming that it is no longer debatable. It is simply a fact. A CNN and Kaiser Family Foundation poll found that 90% of Americans believe the country is in a mental health crisis. 90%, that is not a divided issue. That is not a partisan split. That is near total agreement across every demographic, every income bracket, every age group in the country. And Gallup found that only 29% of Americans describe their mental health as excellent, down 14 points from 2019 and the first time the reading has ever dropped below 30% in the history of the survey. The American Psychiatric Association reported heading into 2026 that 59% of Americans feel anxious about their personal finances, 53% feel anxious about uncertainty regarding the next year, and 49% feel anxious about current events. More than 1 in 3 Americans said they plan to make a mental health-related New Year's resolution for 2026, up 5% from the prior year. And among adults aged 18 to 34, that number was 58%. More than half of young adults are so concerned about their mental state that improving it is their top priority for the year. And in the workplace, where Americans spend the majority of their waking hours, the numbers are catastrophic. Mindshare Partners found that 76% of U.S. workers reported experiencing some level of burnout, with 53% experiencing moderate to severe levels. 84% of employees reported facing at least one mental health challenge in the past year. At least 50% of U.S. employees are currently quiet quitting, which researchers describe as a behavioral signal of chronic emotional disengagement and stress. And the APA found that 54% of workers said job insecurity significantly impacts their stress levels. Depression and anxiety cost the global economy over $1 trillion per year in lost productivity, according to the World Health Organization, And in the United States, diminished productivity from poor mental health drained $438 billion globally in 2024, according to Gallup. But here is the part that most people do not connect to the collapse argument. Mental health is not a separate issue from everything else on this list. It is the consequence of everything else on this list. When you cannot afford groceries, you feel anxious. When your emergency savings get cut in half, you feel afraid. When your rent consumes 59% of your income, you feel trapped. When you work 2 jobs and still cannot get ahead, you feel hopeless. When your kids are going hungry, you feel like a failure. When you watch the people at the top get richer while you sink, you feel rage. And when nobody in power seems to care, when the institutions you were taught to trust are all at record low confidence levels, when the Surgeon General is calling loneliness an epidemic and trust in Congress is at 7%, you feel something that is worse than any individual emotion. You feel that the world does not make sense anymore. And that feeling, that pervasive sense that the rules stopped working and nobody is in charge, that is what collapse actually feels like from the inside. It does not feel like a movie. It does not feel dramatic. It feels like exhaustion. It feels like numbness. It feels like scrolling your phone at 2 a.m. because you cannot sleep, because your brain will not stop doing math on bills you cannot pay. One of the creators in the footage I reviewed for this video said something that I have not been able to stop thinking about. She said, "I feel spiritually broken, and I do not know how to stop feeling this way." And I think that is the most honest description of what is happening in America right now. Millions of people walking around feeling spiritually broken and not knowing what to do about it. And a country full of spiritually broken people is not a country that can solve a $39 trillion debt crisis. It is not a country that can fix its crumbling bridges. It is not a country that can close the wealth gap or save Social Security or make housing affordable. What is a country that has been ground down to the point where survival has replaced ambition and getting through the week has replaced building a future. And that is the most dangerous form of collapse there is, because it does not show up on any chart. It lives inside people. And it is spreading. You already know all of this. That is the point. The collapse is not a surprise. It is a feeling you have been carrying for years, and you finally have the data to prove you were right. All right, here we are. Number 1, and I am not going to give you another statistic. I am not going to cite another study. I am not going to quote another economist or pull up another government report. Because if you have watched this far, you already have all the information you need. What I want to do instead is say the thing that I think this entire video has been building toward. The thing that nobody wants to say, because it does not fit into a soundbite, and it does not get you elected, and it does not look good on a cable news segment. Here it is. You were right. That feeling you have been carrying around, the one that keeps you up at night, the one that makes your stomach drop when you open a bill, or check your bank account, or think about the future, the one that makes you look at your kids and wonder what kind of world they are going to inherit. That feeling is not anxiety. It is not pessimism. It is not you being dramatic or negative or ungrateful. That feeling is your brain doing exactly what it is supposed to do. It is processing information that the world around you is sending you every single day and arriving at the correct conclusion. Something is deeply wrong. And the reason I made this video is not to scare you. I do not need to scare you. You are already scared. Everybody is already scared. 90% of the country says we are in a mental health crisis. 53% cannot cover a $1,000 emergency. Half the workforce is so disengaged that they have quit in spirit even though their body still shows up. The Surgeon General called loneliness an epidemic that is killing people at the rate of 15 cigarettes a day. Trust in every institution that is supposed to hold this together is at or near record lows. The reason I made this video is to give you something that your gut feeling could not give you on its own. Proof, data, evidence, the receipts. Because there is a difference between feeling like something is wrong and knowing that something is wrong. When you feel it, you doubt yourself. You wonder if you are overreacting. You listen to the people on television who tell you the economy is strong because the stock market is up, and you think maybe it is just me. Maybe I am the one who is failing. But when you know it, when you have seen the numbers, when you have traced the systems, when you have stacked the data from 10 different angles and all 10 point in the same direction, you stop doubting yourself. And you start asking different questions. Not what is wrong with me, but what is wrong with the system. And that is the most important shift that can happen in this country right now. Because as long as people blame themselves for problems that are structural, nothing changes. As long as the kid making $16 an hour thinks he just needs to work harder and then he will be able to afford a house, nothing changes. As long as the teacher moonlighting at a theater thinks it is her fault that one job does not pay the bills, nothing changes. As long as the 60-year-old woman with $360,000 saved for retirement thinks she should have been smarter with her money instead of recognizing that the entire pension system was dismantled while she was doing everything right, nothing changes. The collapse wins when you internalize it, when you carry it as personal failure instead of recognizing it as systemic failure. And I refuse to let that happen to the people who watch this channel. So here is what I want you to do. First, stop blaming yourself. The math does not work. Not because you are bad at math, but because the numbers were changed while you were playing the game. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear this. The person in your life who thinks they are alone in their struggle. They are not. Half this country is in the exact same position. They need to know that. Third, go watch the video I made called 10 Things Every American Should Do Right Now Before Prices Get Worse, because that video has the specific, actionable steps you can take to protect yourself and your family while the people in charge figure out whether they are going to fix this or keep pretending it is not happening. And fourth, leave a comment and tell me which number on this list hit you the hardest. Tell me your story. Tell me what you are dealing with right now. Because when we start talking about this openly, honestly, without shame, that is when things start to change. Not in Washington, not on Wall Street, in your community, in your neighborhood, in the space between you and the person next to you who is carrying the exact same weight and does not know that you are too. That is where it starts. America is collapsing in slow motion. And you can feel it. You have always been able to feel it. Now you have the proof. The question is what we do next. Take care of yourselves out there. Take care of each other. And I will catch you in the next one.